Good evening. Halloween is once again upon us. Incidentally, Halloween is my favourite holiday and a great chance for me to merge the spooky world of All Hallows Eve with Aboriginal astronomy by discussing the evil celestial beings that permeate through the Aboriginal dreamings of Arnhem Land. Look out on a clear dark night and you might just see one of those beings streaking across the sky. But be careful. Aboriginal groups across Northern Australia believe this flash of light, what we call a meteor, is the eye of an evil spirit with a ferocious demeanour. This spirit has many names: Tuwatu, Papinjuwari, and Dada. They streak across the sky with their long claws, searching for the souls of the sick or dying. Tonight's stories are all about true encounters with Australian cryptids, so let's get into it. I'm just your typical Aussie bloke. You wouldn't realise it, but I have some Aboriginal heritage in me. Apparently, my great-great-grandmother was part Aboriginal. You might wonder what this has to do with the price of tea in China. It's important to know about Aboriginal culture, because this is a story from the Aboriginal folklore, the Dreamtime. This is a story passed down to me from my nan, which was passed down to her by her nan, which was presumably passed down to her by her parents or grandparents. This is the story from the people of an extinct language from an area we know as WongaibonMan. This is the story of the hairy man, the Yowie, the Australian version of the Bigfoot or Yeti. My ancestors, the Wedjaran people, knew them as Gindi Gindi. European settlers had fleeting encounters with the Yowie since their arrival. Aboriginal people had known about them since before the Dreamtime. Some Aboriginal groups claimed to trade with the hairy man and refused to reveal their whereabouts to the white man. They may not hold any love for the hairy man, but they don't want to see them wiped out like the European settlers almost did to the Aboriginal people. Other Aboriginal tribes feared the hairy man, and I honestly don't blame them. While the Yowie is generally considered the Australian version of Bigfoot, they would be slightly dishonest. Long ago, during the time of dreaming, a man named Wongaibon was walking through the Blue Mountains. He was in search of food for his people. He searched high and low and stumbled across a red-bellied black sleeping on a rock. Wongaibon cautiously approached the rock when a shout came from a nearby bush. The red-bellied black woke up and slithered off, frightening at the shout. Wongaibon raised his spear at the bush, waiting to see who caused the noise. Out stepped a man wearing the fur of a kangaroo and holding two knives.
I saw the red-bellied black first,
the man snarled. Wongaibon was confused, as red-bellied blacks were venomous and didn't taste very good. They had little meat, and it was too tough to eat anyway. I had no intention of eating it, Wongaibon replied. The man wearing the fur of the kangaroo bared his teeth at Wongaibon.
No matter, I'll just eat you instead.
The man leaped at Wongaibon, but Wongaibon fled. A man who eats venomous snakes was not someone Wongaibon wanted to fight. Wongaibon didn't want to lead the man back to his people in fear of their safety, so he hid during the night so he could make sure that he wasn't followed back home. The next day, when he returned to his people, Wongaibon told them about the man wearing the fur of a kangaroo. A wise old elder spoke after hearing Wongaibon's story. I know someone that might have had trouble with who you speak of. Go and speak to the kangaroo that lives out in the red rocks where the sun sets. Wongaibon left the next day, travelling out of the mountains and far to the west. There he met a lone kangaroo and described the man. The kangaroo told Wongaibon, "You speak of Gindi Gindi. He came and slaughtered my people and now wears their fur as a trophy. Most who hunt stop once they're satisfied, but Gindi Gindi is never satisfied. He disrupts the balance of the earth with his hunger. I wish for vengeance against Gindi Gindi. Please help me with it. It'll put my mind at ease and prevent further destruction caused by him." Wongaibon agreed, and they began back to the Blue Mountains. When they arrived back at Wongaibon's camp, they felt something wasn't right. All Wongaibon could find of his people was the bloodstains they left behind. Wongaibon wept. Wongaibon and the kangaroo searched high and low for Gindi Gindi. They came across a small cave littered with bones and pelts. Gindi Gindi wasn't there, so they hid nearby and waited for his return. It didn't take long for Gindi Gindi to arrive, yet they remained hidden. They watched as he lit a fire and threw a handful of red-bellied snakes into the flames. They watched him eat and eat until Gindi Gindi fell asleep. Wangaban crept up to Gindi Gindi and clubbed him over the head. He and the kangaroo took Gindi Gindi, binding his hands and legs with the hide of the snakes. They hung him upside down from the mouth of the cave and suspended a boulder from his fingers. Then they set him alight with a branch from the fire and watched him burn. Wangaban and the kangaroo left the mountains, never to return. They eventually found wives and had many children free from the memories of Gindi Gindi. However, Gindi Gindi didn't die. The fur he wore was burnt into his skin, and his arms and legs were stretched until he could touch the ground as he hung. He freed himself, hungrier for flesh than ever before. His fingers were too long to carry his knives, so he carried them in his mouth. They say he still roams the Blue Mountains to this day. Where I'm from, strange things happen. Don't get me wrong, it's not like we see flying saucers or have Bigfoot walking around in our front yards, but every now and then, one of the locals come back from the bush with strange stories. Sometimes they hear babies crying out in the scrub, or they see strange shadows up on the ridge tops at night. Mostly it's just a wild pig or lyrebird that's heard one too many chainsaws, so growing up you just accept there are things out there that scare people. I used to think it was old truckies having a few beers and making up ripping yarns. I used to. That's until the night I spent out in the bush with Tom. My mate Tom is about as local as you can get. His family has lived on this land since before anyone knew Australia existed, and he's grown up learning everything there is to know about the bush. He's a nice bloke, but he's been known to tell a few tales. Not too long ago, Tom and I decided to go camping down near the creek in the gully outside of town. It was a clear night, so we reckoned a couple of relaxing stubbies next to the fire would be a good idea. If you've ever spent any time camping, you'll know that sitting near a fire in the dark ruins your night vision, and looking out in the dark can play tricks with your eyes. We could see shadows dancing just beyond the campsite, between the trees, and in the ferns and shrubs that covered the ground. Every now and then, a bird would call out or a pig would go crashing through the bush, but Tom was quick to laugh it off. To tell you the truth, I was a bit spooked out. We were about 6 cans deep when Tom said he needed to relieve himself. He ducked off behind the old 4x4 and I was left alone by the fire. That was when things took a strange turn. I heard Tom call out my name from the trees on the other side of the campsite, and thinking he was in some kind of trouble, I got up and had a look. I couldn't see anything, so I pushed through the branches and into the darkness. As my eyes started to adjust to the moonlight, I heard Tom call out again. This time, it sounded more urgent. I was cautious at first, but Tom was my mate, and I didn't want to leave him out in the bush all alone at night. After a couple of minutes of following the sound of his voice, I found myself standing on the edge of a clearing in the scrub. Tom sounded close. I could hear him calling from the other side of the gully. Just as I started to make my way through the trees, someone grabbed my arm. It was Tom. He put his finger up to his lips to indicate that I shouldn't make any noise. In the distance, I heard Tom's voice call out my name again. We made our way back to the campsite in silence, stopping every few steps to listen to the bush and make sure we weren't being followed. Once we got back to the fire, Tom told me some of the stories he'd heard as a kid. When he was a young bloke, the old fellas used to tell the kids about spirits out in the scrub that would try to lure people into the dark by making sounds like children crying or calling out their names in the voices of their friends. The voice I heard from the bush could have been the jitty jitty, a little bird that lures you into the bush for the bulliards. As a child, Tom was told to never leave the circle of firelight because the bulliards would be there, hiding in the darkness. The bulliards are little hairy people who are waiting to catch you for the wheelo, the bringer of death. A couple of years back, the little sleepy town where I grew up became pretty famous, albeit only briefly. It's a fairly remote community and everyone in town knows each other, although we have a lot of truck drivers passing through on their way to other places. Nothing ever really happens here, and it's not the sort of place you'd ever expect to read about in the paper or see on television. That all changed when a couple of backpackers went missing. Apparently, they'd been on their way to Darwin on a Greyhound bus and had decided to jump off and spend the night at the local pub to break up the trip. I suppose they thought they'd get on the next bus and finish up their trip a couple of days later. From what I've been told by the locals, they seemed like nice blokes and nobody had a problem with them. They booked a room at the pub for a couple of nights and mostly kept to themselves. The accommodation in town is pretty basic. It's the sort of place people tend to stay when they're on road crews or on their way across to the mines. The owner of the joint, Bob, gets to know all his guests by name and makes sure they get a hot meal every night before they hit the sack. One morning, two fellas came down to breakfast and told Bob they were planning on heading out into the bush for a bit to look around before lunch. Apparently, they heard from some of the locals that there were some impressive rock formations out along the gorge. Bob sat them down and tried to talk them out of going there alone, but being foreign, they didn't really understand how dangerous the Aussie bush could be. If you've ever spent any time in the Outback, you know what a beautiful but perilous place it can be. You can wander off a trail, walk 10 paces, and end up finding yourself lost without any clue what direction you should be walking. Even if a rescue party manages to come within 50 metres of you, they're still not likely to see you. Once the sun goes down, all manner of strange, ancient things come out to walk through the scrub. The backpackers thought old Rob was having a lend of them, and laughed it off. They packed some bottles of water and sandwiches, and then set off. That was the last time anyone in town ever saw them, alive. There are many legends about people in Australia wandering off into the bush and never coming back. Some of them true, but most of them are made up. Some people will tell you that the Yowies, our version of Bigfoot, have taken them, or that they've been lured into the dark by Quinkins. When those two young fellas went walkabout and didn't come home, we heard plenty of strange explanations from the old blokes in town. After a couple of days, the police put together a search party. Most of the men from town joined. We walked out in the bush near where the backpackers said they were going hiking and spent a good day and night walking a line through the scrub, trying to find them. Around lunchtime on the second day, we found a jacket one of them had been wearing. It was caught in a branch hanging over the edge of an abandoned mine shaft that had fallen in a few years back. We finally managed to get down there, and we found a few bloody scraps of clothing, their bags, and empty water bottle. The sides of the shaft were covered in deep scratches. Some of them looked like they had been made by the two men trying to climb out. Others, well, they looked too far big to belong to any man I've ever known. After that, the police fenced off that part of the national park and put up signs warning people about the mines. The official statement was that two foreigners had probably dropped their gear into the shaft by accident and decided to hitch down to Darwin without going back into town. But others say they fell victim to a Yowie. This took place in a place called Blackheath in the Blue Mountains, not far from Sydney, Australia. Most nights, I sit out on my deck until late, reading and writing while I have a smoke. I have a floodlight out there, but it draws in too many bugs, especially in summer. We get these things called Christmas beetles when the weather gets warm. They're about the size of your thumbnail, and they're stupid as all hell. If you leave a light on at night, they come in scores, bumping into you like drunks at a crowded nightclub. I use a little citronella candle, which is used to shoo the mozzies, but then I turn on a bright spotlight around the other side of the house to lure the beetles away from the back deck. Well, last week on Monday, I was out maybe around 10:30 at night, just doing my usual. Everything was fine until suddenly, the spotlight on the other side of the house goes out. I groaned aloud. I had a spare bulb in the house, but the whole thing was an inconvenience more than anything. Anyway, I went and got the spare bulb, walked around the side of the house to the light, and, well, the bulb wasn't blown. It was gone. Unscrewed and nowhere to be seen, like it grew legs and walked off. Looking around, I heard a weird sort of scraping sound from nearby, like two rocks rubbing together. It started slow and picked up speed, moving fast towards me. I didn't stop to think about it. I just made a beeline for the door and got into the house. Bugger that for a game of soldiers. I locked my door and spent a good 10 minutes just cussing out and turning on every light in the house. I called the cops and told them someone was on my property, but they figured it was probably just some local kids pulling a prank on me. They eventually agreed to send someone out, but they weren't in any hurry. My part of town is pretty quiet. Nothing really happens here. It's lonely. It's out of the way and peaceful. Exactly the kind of place I thought I wanted to live. Well, I was having second thoughts, I can tell you that. The cops showed up the next morning about 9 to ask about the night before. It gave me a good fright when he knocked at the door and woke me up, but I was sure as hell glad to see the sun out my window. He was an Aboriginal cop named Colin. I knew him from around town. He was a nice enough bloke, always gave me a smile and g'day when I passed him on the street. We checked out the spotlight. Bulb missing. No footprints or anything. Weird. No idea where the bulb went. He reckoned it was weird that it wasn't dropped or smashed right under the fitting. Lights like that get bloody hot, and you don't even think about handling them unless you've turned it off for a good while. Not without oven mitts or something on your hands. What kind of teenage vandal carries oven mitts? Anyway, when I got to the sound I heard, the scraping stones, he didn't laugh it off the way I tried to. In fact, he looked pretty bloody serious. Mulungi, he said under his breath. Mulungi? What the hell's a mulungi? I asked. Old kid story. Black fella's been trying to scare kids and keep them from wandering the bush at night as long as your mob. Longer probably, Cohen smiled. So how does the story go? I asked. Mulungi's a tall fella. His skin is hard, like rock. His legs and arms are bandy-like, makes him walk all funny so his knees knock and scrape together when he steps. He usually doesn't cause much trouble, not if you get out of the way when you hear the scrapes. But if you don't, well, he ain't too friendly either. It was obvious that this was just a bit of folklore. That's all? I asked. Well, that's most of it. Arnie says he's got red eyes that you can always see, like fire. And he don't like bright lights all too much. Don't reckon you pissed off an old Mulungi with your spotlight, do ya? Seems less than likely, I said, smiling as I walked Cohen to his car. I spent the rest of the day working from home, got some shopping done and the rest. I replaced the bulb, but decided not to sit outside that night, so I kept it off. Passed the next few days mostly the same way. Nothing too weird to report there. Some nights I thought I heard a scrape, though I saw some eyes out there too. I didn't think much of it though. It's easy to build up these things in your head when you've had a fright. I kept inside at night till Saturday, 5 days since the incident with the light. I figured I should stop being such an idiot and make use of my deck again. So that night, I was sitting out, about the same time, having a smoke and editing some stuff I've written for a job I took. I fixed the spotlight, so that was on around the corner keeping the beetles at bay, and I had my little citronella candle to shoot the mozzies. I was feeling pretty fine till I heard the bulb smash. The light around the side suddenly went dark. It was quite a moment, but then the night erupted with this gravelly scream that sounded like nothing I'd ever heard. There was no bloody teenager. I turned toward the house and the sound came. The scraping stone. Slow at first, but picking up speed and hurrying fast around the house towards me. I bolted for the back door and pretty much jumped through as I slammed it behind me. I hardly had time to latch it before the handle began to shake and that goddamn stone scratching was just outside. Realizing the door was locked, it moved toward a window. I stood still. It didn't follow me inside last time, but looking at that window and seeing its face stoop down and smile that lipless toothy grin at me, well, it put the fear of God in me then and there. It didn't hesitate to smash the glass out and reach inside. I didn't really have time to react. I grabbed at my keys, but by the time I turned to make for the front door, it already had half clambered into the house. This thing was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, spindly and long-limbed. It looked almost spider-like with its limbs oddly folding through the window. The skin looked black or maybe like stone, but those big red eyes were all I had the time to take in properly before I got the hell out of Dodge. Sure as anything, those were the eyes I'd seen out my window. Those eyes looked pissed. It screamed horribly and swung its arms at me as I ran for the front door, bursting into the night and slamming it behind me. I was glad I never bothered to park my car inside the garage. I pull open the door to my Nissan Patrol, fall in, and just as I start the engine, the front door bursts open into splinters as that god-awful Malingee barrels out into the night. That smile, that sickeningly wide smile it made as it lurched toward me on all fours, the scrape of stone on stone as its knees clicked together. I have no idea how I made it into town without flipping my car. I drove faster that night than I've ever driven in my life. I've never gone back to that place. Whoever buys my old house can have whatever I left behind. I sure as hell don't want to go get it. About 100 years ago, a bloke named Frank Ham was exploring around Pilbara in Western Australia, mythireality's hometown. He reckoned that all the streams flowing inland meant that there must be some inland sea at the end of it all. He wasn't wrong. Lake Disappointment, he called it. Used to laugh every time I saw it on the map. This is one of the biggest salt beds in the country. There's water too, plenty of it at the right time of the year, though nothing you could drink without gagging. Nowadays, the land up that way is being used for mining, like most of the Outback really. Used to think it was a damn shame till I got a job at one. Looking back, I guess I've come full circle. Potash, that's what we were digging up. Water-soluble potassium gets used in fertilizers and animal feed. My job was the fun part, drilling and detonating. It sounds dumb, I know, but I've always loved big machines. Most guys I work with used to blast music or listen to podcasts under their earmuffs. I used to just like listening to the engine though, the gears and the drill. It felt good, and I guess because of that, I was always a little bit more attentive than the other blokes who worked at the mine. I was always watching, listening, aware of my surroundings. When we broke through the wall and into the cavern, I swear to God, I saw something scampering away on the other side. I powered down the drill as soon as we breached, unnerved by the thing I saw. I guess I assumed it was just a local wandering down in the caves. We weren't really that deep after all. It can be pretty dangerous to just go drilling into chasms under a salt lake. Could be flooded, might not be stable. In theory, it shouldn't happen because the boys with the clipboards are supposed to be able to tell where there's a cavern, and to tell us not to dig there, or at least warn us first. Well, I guess somebody got an ear bashing over this one. Once the dust had settled, and I was sure that the roof wasn't going to fall down on me, I poked my head in to have a look. I have to say that the cavern itself was pretty beautiful, like its own little world underneath ours. The roof above was peach-coloured and translucent, so the sun shone through, bathing everything in sort of a pinkish glow. I figured we must have been under a relatively thin crust of pretty unusual salt rock on the surface, like a big stained glass ceiling. Weird thing was that the wind seemed to be coming up out of the cavern. Could have just been the pressure of difference equalising, but it unnerved me either way. We had to get a geologist down from the surface, but I figured I'd take a look around while I had the opportunity. There was a good chance I'd get told that I wasn't allowed in the cavern once it had been inspected, so I wanted to make sure I got an eyeful while I could still plead ignorance. Inside, it was pretty surreal to say the least. The winds felt stronger in the room if anything, but other than my clothes flapping about, everything had an odd stillness to it. I guess this sounds dumb, but it almost felt like a church. That weird sort of tranquility you get in an old-fashioned cathedral with a high ceiling. Down toward the back of the cavern, I could see a passage that seemed to go deeper in, but I didn't want to go too far out of sight. After a minute or two of gawking, the wind stopped, and I don't know, I just felt wrong. Like I had eyes staring intently down the back of my neck. I made my way out as quick as I could, but I felt something catch my ankle on the way back through the breach. Probably just a rock or something, but it sure as hell put a spring in my step. It wasn't until I got back to my bunk that arvo that I noticed the blood. I'm not sure how nobody pointed it out to me. The whole bloody sock was so red, and from all what looked like just a little nick in my ankle. The thing was still bleeding, slowly, but it didn't hurt. It was like a leech bite. The little buggers has some sort of anticoagulant in their saliva that stops your blood clotting. You bleed for hours. I went to see the doctor on site, Cassie, only about 25, but I swear she has enough wits for 3 lifetimes. She got a job out in Lake Disappointment straight after her medical degree. Not hard to guess why. Payout in the mines is great for all of us, even the cleaners. I can't even imagine what they were paying a doctor. "Looks like you still got something stuck in there," she said as she prodded with a set of tweezers. "Not sure how deep it is. Do you want any anesthetic, or should I just start pulling and see what happens?" "You're the doctor," I laughed as she shook her head. She was used to everybody playing the tough guy. Aussie men are stubborn enough in cities. You can imagine how it gets with blokes out in the mines. The tweezers caught something as Cassie began to tug. Frowning with concentration, she had to stifle a gasp when the bloody thing just kept going. Only after she had it all the way out could I see what it was. A claw? No. A nail. A long, but definitely human nail. This thing was 10 centimeters deep and filed sharp as razor. How the hell was I walking on that? Cassie looked white in the face. It's not every day you see a doctor get squeamish. "How the bloody hell did you get this lodge in your ankle?" she asked me, when the shock had worn off. "Your guess is as good as mine, eh?" I replied, trying to keep it cool. The tone in my voice gave me away though. I had a chill down my back like you wouldn't believe. I got to miss a day of work to rest, which was nice. Still didn't hurt though, which was weird. The bleeding stopped eventually though. The uneasy feeling I got from the whole ordeal simmered down a little as well, but didn't leave entirely. I kept thinking about the stuff I heard about this place before I took the job. The lake is supposed to be some sort of holy place to the locals. The Matu tribe they're called, a pretty friendly mob, or seemed to be a couple of times when I met them, even if they didn't seem too keen to have us around. Apparently, we were paying them some pretty big money to mine here though, so I guess the elders were letting it slide. Maybe not everybody in the tribe thought it was a good idea. There was supposed to be some sort of thing that scared the Matu from coming too close to the lake itself. They called it the Nyanangalaku. I'm told it means like cannibal in their language, but I wouldn't be able to tell if they were just having me on. Initially, I thought that the boys were trying to wind me up when they told me about it, but after a while, I noticed that the Matu definitely kept their distance from the lake. They kept their distance from us too for the most part, like we were contagious or something. It unsettled me some, especially after my little incident. Now here's where things get really shady. This should give you some idea of what the people running these mines are like. It turns out that when my boss found out about the cavern, he started to panic. See, the thing you need to know about unique and beautiful caves with natural crystal ceilings is that it can be pretty hard to get permission to blow them up and cart away their minerals. My boss, of course, a true Aussie mining executive, was pissing himself over the chance that this discovery would slow down business. I wasn't even surprised when the news came down that we were going to detonate the cavern before word caught on, and we found the whole mine heritage listed. And of course, wanting as few people as possible to know about this, yours truly was asked to carry out the detonation. I know I'm a scumbag. I wish I could say that I turned them down and quit on the spot, that I called the papers and made a situation. Maybe I would have too, but Christ on the bike, I thought that little scribble at the bottom of the work order was a phone number until I noticed a $sign next to it. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but only a little bit. Suffice to say, every man has his price, and now I know mine. It was just me and the other guy sent down to wire up the cavern, which was completely irregular for a blast that big, but like I said, they were trying to keep things low key. I had some pretty big reservations about going back in the cavern, but I was pretty keen on the idea of retiring at age 30, so I soldiered on. When we got down there, it was just the same as I'd left it. The breach was just big enough to slide through if you crouched a little, and wind was blowing out the cavern. The work itself didn't take too long. You'd be surprised how few explosives it takes to bring down a million-year-old cave network. Having someone else in there with me eased my worry a little bit. After an hour or so, the unease had completely left me, until the wind stopped. We only had a couple of charges left to go when it happened. Immediately, I got the feeling again, the sense of being watched. I turned to my workmate Dave.
We should probably get out of here. Get the shop done early and have the arvo off,
he said. He was clearly unnerved as I was, but of course, blokes out in the mines don't admit to being scared. We were both halfway to the breach when we heard it. A rattling sound, followed by a screech that could have woke up the dead. We would have run straight out, but trouble was, it was sitting right above the only exit, he, she, I don't know what to call it. This thing was shaped like a human, but it looked wrong. Crawling around the wall like a bug. Its skin was chalk white and mangy hair covered its face. I think I'm thankful for that. One thing that did stand out though, its nails. Every damn one of them hideously long, and I would assume sharp as a bloody razor. All except one of them. One of them was broken off. Apparently, most people's natural response to fear can be described in 2 words: fight or flight. While Dave, bless his soul, was apparently more of a fighter, the latter option always suited me better. I didn't get a look at what happened after he charged the thing, but I sure as hell heard it. A scream, a tearing noise, and finally some sort of sickening pop followed by a spattering sound. The 2 of them had met somewhere in the middle though, and after I'd ran sidelong a bit the way between me and the breach was clear. I almost tripped when I saw Dave's head fly past me and bounce off the wall of the cavern, but adrenaline is one hell of a drug. Now the bit I was dreading, I'd have to squat down to get out of the hole. That meant slowing down. Not fun. I bit my lip and tried to sort of dive and slide through, but needless to say, that was a dumb idea. My shoulder hit the corner of the hole hard, and I found myself halfway out and on my stomach. That's when I felt it. The same damn stabbing shooting up in my ankle, the other ankle this time. Turning my head so I'd know where to kick, my blood ran cold. No eyes. The bastard had no eyes, but I swear on my life it was looking right at me. Slits for nostrils and a mouth full of teeth that would have made a meth addict blush. I pulled my foot frantically and the nail driven into my ankle snapped off. With my other foot, I kicked at its face while I scrambled back on my elbows. I know someone up there is looking out for me, because I felt something crunch under my boot and the creature reeled back long enough for me to make like Harold Holt. The charges were all wireless of course, and needless to say, there's an app for that. Generally speaking, it's best to get out of the tunnel before you blow it up, but this was no time for formalities. I heard that thing scream one last time as it scrambled through the breach. I woke up with Doc Cassie looking down at me, after what I'm told was a rather significant blow to the back of my head, loose debris from the explosion. The hard hat had taken the worst of it, but I had a minor fracture to my skull, and the headache to end all headaches. Nobody knew what happened down there, and so naturally, they assumed it had been an accidental detonation. I wasn't in a hurry to correct them. I knew what I saw. I also knew how crazy the truth would sound. The big lump on my head wouldn't exactly have made me any more believable either. I think I was happy to let them all think that it was just a freak accident. Maybe if they all believed it, I could too. Maybe I did just get hit in the head too hard. Maybe my memory of the whole ordeal is just some screwed up nightmare that my pain-addled brain cooked up during the 3-day coma I was in. I wish I had the option to believe that. Unfortunately, I had a witness to corroborate my story. A long razor-sharp but disturbingly human nail that Cassie pulled from my ankle while I was asleep. A little reminder that for some reason, she felt she had to show me when I woke up. Rumour has it that it was either a yowie or a gindi-gindi. That brings us to the end. So those were 5 Australian cryptid stories. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please give it a like and let me know what you thought in the comments below. To all my friends and listeners in North America, please stay safe. Have a fun Halloween, and I'll see you guys in the next one.